My name is Sammie Lewis, Sammie, Sammie Lewis, Lewis. I am actually currently just a rogue commie, as I like to call myself.
Okay, so like I know you became like very active during the 2020 George Floyd protests and were kind of there during the beginning of DWB and all that. So like can we do like a little bit of background on that? Like can you set the scene on that time period?
Yeah, my first day out in 2020 was June 2nd. I was like still living at home with my parents, and I didn't want to go out yet because of COVID, and my mom had diabetes, my dad had prostate cancer, so I was really anxious about going out. But then I just kept watching the Detroit Free Press streams and felt like I had to be there. So I did end up going, and my first day was June 2nd, where we were kettled on Gratiot and taken to the Little Caesars Arena basement. So after that, I felt like I had to just like keep coming out because I knew that I knew that we were protesting police brutality, and I knew that we would be met with it, but that was like my firsthand experience with it. And that entire summer of 2020 was just a lot of police brutality. I felt like that the dates, even now, still stand out in my head, from June 2nd to June 28th, where we were hit by police cars, to July 10th, where we defended Hakeem Littleton when he was executed, and they met us with a riot line that was incredibly aggressive, to August 22nd, our worst brutality that we faced from the Detroit Police Department, for holding an occupation where we blew bubbles and danced.
Okay, can you talk about Detroit Will Breathe? Like what were their demands in regards to like Project Greenlight and police in the city broadly speaking?
Our demands with Detroit Will Breathe, and like mind you, that was a while ago for me, but our biggest demand was to defund and demilitarize the police. And to demilitarize, that also meant getting rid of hyper surveillance such as Project Greenlight.
How would you describe James Craig's relationship with DWB and the protesters generally?
I felt like that James Craig had it out for us in DWB. I think that he had it out for those of us that were protesting in general, but at some point it seems like he specifically had like a vengeance for Detroit Will Breathe. It felt like that, I don't know, you can like kind of notice the differences with how things were then and how they are now with Chief White, which not giving him any credit. But Craig was always sending riot cops after us. But with White, we have not seen that yet with the Palestinian protests. But I also think that the restraining order that DWB placed on the Detroit police had a lot of leverage.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Like, can you talk about the like DWB's lawsuit against DPD?
I wasn't actually part of the lawsuit, so I can't talk too much about that, but there were several plaintiffs that were part of it, and they settled. It was a very good settlement, and I think that it was a historical moment for like movements, specifically like BLM movements and movements against the police. That lawsuit was successful. I think that the restraining order, though, was one of the biggest wins, because I think that that's something that has benefited us as a movement even now, because I think that the police honestly don't know what to do with that. I think that they don't know who that applies to, as far as protesters, and I think that's why we haven't seen such a violent response from the police yet in this time.
How did the restraining order come about?
The restraining order happened, I want to say after August 22nd, but I might have that a little mixed up. That I know that was when the lawsuit came out, so actually I think the restraining order was before that. I think that the restraining order came about after we were hit with the police cars, and I would say after Hakeem Littleton as well. Some of the clauses of the restraining order was to that the police could not use vehicles as weapons. They couldn't use tear gas, pepper spray. They couldn't use excessive force. And, these are all things that, like, they legally really weren't supposed to do anyway, but the restraining order really held up.
What happened with Hakeem Littleton?
That day, honestly, I refer to the 2020 protests as the uprisings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, but that specific day I refer to as the uprising of Hakeem Littleton. From what I can recall, that day started out, I was at home. I knew that I was going to be protesting later, but then suddenly I remember seeing texts in a chat that something happened, that a black kid was shot in the streets in a residential area in Detroit. So we started trickling into that location of San Juan and McNichols, and they had cops already gearing up. Nobody would answer our questions. All we were doing was chanting, and instead of just saying, we're gonna release this information later, they met us with violence. And I remember a cloud of smoke that I don't think was actually tear gas. And then I just remember this riot line meeting us and people immediately falling to the ground. I remember having to pull a protester back, who was a lot bigger than me too, because he was getting trampled after being pushed to the ground. And I pulled him back and brought him back up to his feet. And seconds later, one of the officers was aiming a baton for my head, and that protester got in front of me. I remember seeing another protester and friend of mine pushed so hard that her head hit the ground, to the point she actually suffered a traumatic brain injury. I remember I had fresh stitches that were wrapped, and very clearly I had an injury, and the police aimed for my arm with a baton. It was a very violent day, and they met us with brutality, but the neighborhood honestly really showed out and fought back. And I think it was a really powerful moment, and it showed how impactful and powerful the people are. And we were able to hold our ground again. Some people got arrested, and we marched on to the police station.
Were you personally arrested or detained at all, or cited even in 2020?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
I was detained June 2nd. So when we were kettled and taken to the Little Caesars arena, I was arrested, or rather detained, in a bus protest when they wanted to send the Detroit school kids back to school in the summer to use them as guinea pigs for COVID. And we protested the buses from leaving, and in that they arrested us, and they actually took us to the detention center on a school bus in the summer where they blasted the heat. At some point I remember I don't have diabetes, but if I'm exhausted and I haven't ate, my blood sugar might drop, and I needed a glucose capsule that I had on me, and the police refused to let me have it. But then everybody was starting to chant to let me have it. And so the police gave it to me with my hands zip tied behind my back, where I had to literally do a back bend to get this medical thing to my mouth. I was also detained I was arrested in Shelby Township, which was a big one. Or no, I wasn't arrested. I was charged 2 months after the fact. Some people were arrested there, but then they charged, I want to say somewhere between 6 and 8 of us, a lot later. And it was literally 2.5 months, and that case lasted probably 2.5 years, but counting the non-reporting probation, I had to go on 3 years. So yeah, I'm probably missing some things as well, but those are the ones that are coming to mind.
Okay. Kind of moving forward here, like how would you describe Project Greenlight and its impact on the city of Detroit?
I think that Project Greenlight is a hyper-surveillance tool to monitor and harass Black and brown people within the city. I don't think that it's something that keeps us safe. I think that it's something that creates issues of safety, because a lot of times the people that are bringing violence to neighborhoods and to stores and surrounding areas in the city is the police. I think that instead of installing this ridiculous green light and hyper surveillance tool, that we need resources for the people, and the money that is spent on Project Greenlight could have instead been spent on streetlights, could have been spent on recreation centers, could have been spent on food and other sort of resources that people really need and are not able to get, which is also causing an increase in crime. Because people don't have what they need, so that's when you see more robberies. And whether they're violent or not, that would just go away, in a drastic amount if people just had the things that they needed instead of cameras.
Okay, are you familiar with the statistic that Project Greenlight's facial recognition feature misidentifies people 96% of the time, specifically Black people? Why do you think that is? Why does it have trouble telling Black people apart?
Because it's a racist tool. I think that, again, it's a racist tool to monitor specifically Black and brown people. It's not something we're seeing put in place in suburbs. It's put in place in a city like Detroit because of the marginalized people here. It is a racist tool because of the system of policing is racist. The system of policing was started from slave patrol. So to continue that kind of monitoring is a historical sort of idea. And that is why there's a misidentification of Black people, and specifically Black men, because they think that all Black men look alike, and they think that Black men are criminals.
What alternatives to policing do you think, what, in your mind, what theories do you have about, reducing crime in general that are beyond, conventional policing tactics?
I think that, like I said, we just need, resources. I think that when I talk to people who are for the police, who want more police, I try to ask them questions like getting to the root of what they really want, which is to feel safe. They don't want more police, they want to feel safe. And you have to think of it this way, that you put more police in and nothing actually changes. The crime rate doesn't go down. Nothing is changing. So I think that shows that our system of policing is really not working. And again, with it being started and created from slave patrol, it's not working. It's not made to work for our kind of people. It's made to work for the system that it benefits, which is the capitalists and imperialists and racists. So I think that really we just have to get rid of the entire system and reconsider what safety measures look like as a community, and not give people power to police.